Imagine standing before a mirror, but not just any mirror. This one doesn't reflect your hairstyle, your skin, or the way your clothes fall. Instead, it reflects something far more intimate, the sum of all your pain, your memories, your courage, your struggles. It reflects your soul. And what you see there, not perfection, not polish, but scars. Not the kind anyone can see. These are psychic scars, the invisible lines drawn by heartbreaks, betrayals, losses, fears you never spoke aloud, and nights you cried silently into your pillow. These scars are not signs of weakness. They're evidence that you have lived, suffered, endured, and kept going. But here's where we often misunderstand healing. We think that to heal means to erase the pain, to forget it ever happened. That if we just move forward fast enough, maybe the past won't catch up. But as the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung once said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In other words, most of our mental distress, the anxiety, depression, overthinking, and endless emotional spirals, doesn't come from the pain itself. It comes from our refusal to feel it fully. We run from grief. We distract from fear. We silence rage. We smile over heartbreak. We numb with screens, substances, schedules, and self-judgment. But all the while the pain remains, buried, but not gone. And here's the paradox. Healing only begins when we stop running. When we stop treating pain like the enemy and start treating it like a messenger. The fire that transforms us. Jung often used the metaphor of alchemy, the ancient mystical practice of transforming base metals like lead into gold. He believed the same process could happen within the human soul. When we consciously confront our suffering, when we walk directly into our grief, our fear, our rage, we begin an alchemical transformation. The raw lead of pain is slowly transmuted into the gold of wisdom, compassion, and emotional strength. This isn't poetic exaggeration. It's a deep psychological truth. Every time you sit with your heartbreak instead of running from it, you're gaining insight. Every time you allow yourself to cry, to scream, to grieve, you're reclaiming parts of yourself. You're becoming whole. Wholeness doesn't mean being untouched by pain. It means being touched by it and integrating it. Strength in the broken places. There's a beautiful Japanese art called kintsugi, the repairing of broken pottery with veins of gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, the gold illuminates them. It says, yes, this bowl was broken, and now it is more beautiful for having been broken. This is the visual metaphor for emotional resilience. It's not about never breaking. It's about how you rebuild. We all break in some way. Some of us break in childhood, some in heartbreak, some in silence, some in battle. But what defines us is not that we were broken. What defines us is what we do with those pieces. Do we pretend the cracks aren't there? Do we cover them with a social mask? Or do we fill them with gold? Jung believed that every wound, when faced with conscious awareness and compassion, becomes a doorway, a chance to become more than we were before the pain, a chance to integrate. Why? Avoiding pain creates more pain. You might wonder, what's the harm in avoiding suffering? Why not just suppress it and move on? Because suppressed pain doesn't die. It just goes underground, into the unconscious mind. There, it morphs, it festers, it becomes anxiety, insomnia, irritability, depression, numbness, or even self-destructive behaviors. Avoiding sadness can make you anxious. Avoiding anger can make you passive-aggressive. Avoiding grief can make you cold or constantly distracted. One of Jung's most important insights is this: what we do not make conscious will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. In other words, the pain we don't face becomes the script we unconsciously live out. The butterfly struggle. Why difficulty is necessary. Think of a butterfly struggling to escape its cocoon. That effort, the push, the strain, the friction, is not a flaw. It's a requirement. It strengthens the wings. If someone were to tear open the cocoon to help the butterfly, it would emerge too weak to fly. Human psychology works the same way. We often try to protect ourselves or others from emotional struggle. We avoid discomfort. We rush healing. We distract from loss. But in doing so, we may be robbing ourselves of the very growth we need. Just like muscle needs resistance to grow strong, the soul needs meaningful suffering to grow whole. Grieving is not weakness. It's strength in motion. Take the example of grief. Society gives us little room to mourn. We're told to move on, to stay strong, to get back to work. But unexpressed grief doesn't vanish, it festers. Someone who doesn't allow themselves to grieve a death or a breakup or a betrayal may find themselves later feeling depressed, disconnected, or irrationally angry. These are symptoms not of weakness, but of postponed mourning. Jung believed that if we instead allow ourselves to fully feel, if we allow ourselves to cry, to remember, to write, to scream, to speak, to mourn, then we actually begin a transformation. We create space for the pain to move through us. Instead of being stored within us, grief becomes gratitude, anger becomes clarity, pain becomes wisdom, not overnight, but gradually, in layers. Transformation through acknowledgement. Healing begins the moment we stop trying to erase pain, and instead acknowledge it. Each time you say, "That hurt me. I was afraid. I feel abandoned. I'm not okay," you take back a piece of your soul. You reclaim the truth of your experience. And the truth is the foundation for transformation. When we lie to ourselves to protect our ego, we fragment. When we tell ourselves the truth, even painful truths, we begin to integrate. We become more whole. The pain we face becomes the path. The invitation to alchemy. So here's the invitation. Don't run from the fire. Step into it. Not recklessly, not all at once, but bravely, gently, with self-compassion. Sit with your pain. Listen to it. Ask it. What are you here to teach me? What part of me have I neglected? What part of my life is asking to be healed? This is the beginning of alchemy. Not in a lab, but in your heart. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not weak for feeling pain. You are not late in your healing journey. You are, like all of us, a soul in the process of becoming whole. Emotional resilience, in Jung's view, doesn't come from toughening up or pretending everything is fine. It comes from wholeness, from embracing every part of who you are, especially the parts you were taught to hide. So next time you find yourself in pain, ask not, "How do I get rid of this?" but rather, "What can this teach me?" Because in that question lies the seed of transformation, and in that transformation lies your true power. Imagine this. You're walking down a hallway filled with mirrors, but each mirror shows a version of you that you've tried to forget. One reflects your jealousy, another, your rage. Another shows the part of you that craves control, or attention, or revenge. And in the farthest mirror, barely visible, is a version of you curled up in fear, afraid of rejection, abandonment, failure. This hallway is not a fantasy. It exists inside all of us, and Jung gave it a name, the shadow. What is the shadow? The shadow is not evil. It's not a demon lurking in your subconscious. It's simply the part of you that you've rejected, repressed, or denied. It holds the emotions you were told not to feel, the desires you were taught to be ashamed of, the instincts that didn't fit the ideal image of who you're supposed to be. Were you punished for crying as a child? You might have stuffed your vulnerability into the shadow, told that anger is bad. Into the shadow it went, laughed at for being sensitive. That tenderness now lives in exile, told you were too much. You've spent your life being less to be loved. In Jung's words, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. Facing it means facing ourselves. How the shadow sabotages you. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. What you refuse to see in yourself doesn't disappear. It just controls you from the dark. When you don't acknowledge your anger, it leaks out in passive aggression. When you don't face your insecurity, you seek constant validation. When you reject your neediness, you become cold or over-independent. When you suppress your fear, you become hyper-controlling. The more we try to be only good, the more violently the shadow will demand expression. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes the shadow shows up quietly, procrastinating right before success, pushing away people who get too close, sabotaging healthy relationships, feeling empty in moments that should bring joy. These aren't random. They are unconscious patterns, born from unresolved inner conflicts. Projection. Seeing in others what we hide in ourselves. Jung described a process called projection, where we attribute our own denied traits onto others. Ever hated someone for being arrogant while secretly craving recognition yourself? Ever judged someone for being emotional when you're suppressing your own sadness? Ever been triggered by someone's freedom because you feel trapped? That's projection. We dislike in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. In Jung's words, Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This is the uncomfortable mirror. Every emotional trigger is an invitation to ask, what part of me is trying to be seen? Why we fear the shadow. You might wonder, if integrating the shadow leads to self-awareness, why do we avoid it? Because it's painful. Because it threatens the story we tell about ourselves. If you've always seen yourself as the nice one, how do you reconcile the part of you that resents being taken for granted? If you pride yourself on being independent, how do you face the part that just wants to be held? If you're the high achiever, how do you admit you're exhausted? The shadow threatens our ego identity, the carefully constructed image of who we think we should be. But ego is not the enemy. It's just incomplete. It's the mask. And healing begins when we allow ourselves to take it off. The gift of the shadow. Here's the paradox. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's your power, waiting to be claimed. In your rage is your ability to set boundaries. In your jealousy is a message about what you value. In your fear is your need for safety and self-compassion. In your shame is the wounded child longing to be loved, as is. When we welcome these parts, not as flaws to be fixed, but as truths to be understood, we start to become whole. Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means nothing inside you is exiled anymore. You don't need to get rid of your darkness. You need to integrate it. Shadow work, how to begin. So how do you do it? How do you meet your shadow? Not by fighting it, not by fixing it, but by getting curious. Try this. Notice your triggers. What kind of people irritate you? What situations feel intolerable? Write them down. Ask why. What does this remind you of? What feeling are you avoiding? Connect it to the past. When did you learn that this part of you wasn't acceptable? What did you believe you had to be in order to be loved? Write a dialogue. Sit with your anger, your jealousy, your insecurity. Let it speak. What does it need from you? This isn't about wallowing. It's about listening. The more you listen, the more the shadow transforms, from a hidden saboteur to a conscious ally. Real strength comes from integration. Jung once said, "I'd rather be whole than good." It's a powerful statement. We spend so much time trying to be good by societal standards, family values, religious ideals. But often, in chasing goodness, we abandon ourselves. We silence what doesn't fit. We disconnect from our own needs. We become strangers to ourselves. But to be whole is different. To be whole is to say, I am light, and I am shadow. I am kind, and sometimes resentful. I am generous, and I have limits. I want to love, and I'm afraid of getting hurt. This is the truth of being human. The shadow in relationships nowhere. Does the shadow show up more clearly than in relationships? Every unmet need, every unhealed wound, every denied emotion, you bring all of it into connection with another person. This is why relationships are not just about love. They are mirrors of your unconscious. The partner who ignores you may echo the parent who emotionally abandoned you. The friend who always needs saving might reflect your need to be needed. The boss who criticizes you may trigger your internalized self-judgment. You're not crazy, you're being activated. And these activations, while painful, are opportunities. Each is a doorway back to yourself, back to the parts of you that never got to speak. Healing is becoming real. In the end, healing isn't about being more positive or spiritual or productive. It's about being more real. It's about looking yourself in the eye and saying, I see all of you. I don't love only the pretty parts. I'm staying, even when it's uncomfortable. This is inner alchemy, not turning darkness into light, but recognizing that both are part of the same flame. The shadow is not the villain. It's the orphaned part of you, asking to come home. When you stop fearing your depth, you become deep. When you stop hiding your truth, you become powerful. When you stop running from yourself, you become free. So next time you feel triggered, ask, what part of me is asking to be loved? Because in that question is your return to wholeness. Close your eyes. Picture a version of yourself at 5 years old. Maybe they're sitting alone in a corner. Maybe they're wide-eyed, searching for someone to notice them. Maybe they're smiling, pretending everything's fine, when deep down, they're hurting. What would you say to them? Would you offer comfort? Would you apologize for the times they felt invisible? Would you hold them and whisper, you didn't do anything wrong? This isn't just an emotional exercise. This is inner child work, the most tender, vulnerable, and powerful chapter of inner alchemy. Who is the inner child? The inner child isn't just a poetic idea. It's the emotional blueprint you carry from your earliest experiences. It holds your unmet needs, your learned beliefs about love, safety, and worth, your earliest memories of pain, joy, shame, and longing. The inner child is the you who first learned, I must be perfect to be accepted. My needs are too much. If I'm not helpful, I'm not lovable. Being emotional is dangerous. And while we grow older, get jobs, have relationships, that child never stops living inside us. How the wounded inner child affects the adult self. You may be 30, 40, 50, but the 6-year-old inside you is still making decisions. They show up in how you react to criticism, in how you respond to silence, in how you chase validation or fear abandonment. Ever felt disproportionately upset when a friend cancels plans? That's your inner child remembering what it felt like to be forgotten. Ever felt anxious when a partner pulls away, even slightly? That's the child in you fearing rejection. The wounds may be old, but the nervous system doesn't know time. It remembers everything. Childhood doesn't have to be bad to be wounding. Many people say, I had a normal childhood, my parents loved me. And that may be true, but inner child wounds don't always come from abuse or neglect. Sometimes they come from emotional invalidation, being told to toughen up, parentification, being forced to grow up too fast, conditional love, being praised only for achievements, inconsistency, sometimes being supported, sometimes ignored. You can be loved and still feel unseen. You can be protected and still feel emotionally alone. You can be successful and still feel like you're not enough. Because the wound isn't logical, it's emotional. The root of shame and the false self. When a child experiences emotional pain, they don't blame the environment. They blame themselves. If I'm not being comforted, I must be too much. If I'm being criticized, I must be bad. If I'm being ignored, I must not matter. From this, the false self is born. It's the version of you that tries to be easy, be impressive, be funny, smart, attractive, successful. All in the hope of being chosen, of being safe, of being loved. But here's the tragedy. The more you perfect the false self, the more the real you disappears. How this shows up in adulthood. The false self is incredibly good at performing, pleasing, adapting, surviving, but it struggles with authenticity, boundaries, self-worth, rest. You may have everything on paper, a good job, a partner, social approval, but feel disconnected, restless, or numb. Why? Because the child in you doesn't want more success. They want to be held. They want someone to say, you didn't have to earn love, you just deserved it. Signs, your inner child needs healing. You feel emotionally reactive to small things. You struggle to trust or feel safe in intimacy. You constantly seek external validation. You feel guilty for resting or saying no. You feel chronically anxious or emotionally starved, even in healthy environments. These aren't signs that you're broken. They're signs that your inner child is still waiting for something they never received. Reparenting, becoming the caregiver. You needed healing doesn't mean blaming your parents forever. It means becoming the parent you needed. This is called reparenting. It looks like setting boundaries that protect you, listening to your emotions without judgment, giving yourself permission to feel, rest, play, and cry, validating your worth without needing others to do it first. Reparenting isn't about being perfect. It's about creating safety internally. It's about walking into that inner room, sitting beside the 6-year-old version of you and saying, I'm here now, and I'm not leaving. How to start. Inner child work. Here are simple but powerful ways to begin. Inner child. Letters. Write a letter to your younger self. Let them speak. What did they need to hear? What were they afraid of? Visual dialogues. Close your eyes and imagine your child's self in front of you. Ask, what do you need from me right now? Self-soothing practices. When you feel triggered, pause. Place a hand on your heart. Say, you're safe. I'm with you. Photographic anchors. Keep a childhood photo nearby. When you're spiraling, look at it. Would you say the things you say to yourself to them? This isn't about pretending the past didn't hurt. It's about making sure your past no longer controls your future. The inner child and relationships. Unhealed inner child wounds often create anxious attachment, don't leave me. Avoidant attachment, don't get too close. Codependency, I need to be needed to feel loved. Self-abandonment, your needs come before mine. But when you start healing the child within, you become less reactive. You no longer seek love that mimics your childhood wounds. You stop choosing people who reinforce your shame. And most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself. The path to emotional maturity. Healing the inner child isn't about becoming less emotional. It's about becoming emotionally honest. It's saying, yes, I feel fear, but I don't run from it. Yes, I want connection, but I won't betray myself to get it. Yes, I still have wounds, but I'm not ashamed of them. This is maturity, not the absence of pain, but the presence of compassion. You stop being ruled by your past because you've befriended it, becoming who you needed. Every wound holds a message. Every trigger reveals a truth. Every tear carries the voice of the child who was once silenced. And when you finally stop running, when you finally sit with that child and listen, you realize you are the one they were waiting for. You are the adult now. You have the love, the words, the safety they needed. And when you give it to them, consistently, patiently, gently, something miraculous happens. They stop crying. They smile. And for the first time in your life, you feel whole. You've faced the silence. You've met the child. You've held the pain. Now, there's one final door, and behind it, not more trauma, not more suffering, but power. The kind of power that doesn't dominate. The kind that liberates. But to step through that final door, one thing remains. You must face the shadow. What is the shadow? The shadow isn't evil. It's not something wrong with you. The shadow is simply this. Everything you were taught not to be. Were you punished for being angry? You buried your anger. Were you told to calm down when you were excited? You dimmed your joy. Were you laughed at for being sensitive? You learned to hide your heart. And over time, you split into the self that performs and the self that hides. The hidden self is your shadow. Why most people avoid the shadow? Because it's uncomfortable. To face the shadow is to admit, I'm not always kind. I sometimes manipulate. I have envy, lust, fear, and control in me. I sabotage what I want the most. It's terrifying to confront. But here's the paradox. What we repress controls us. What we integrate empowers us. You don't heal by pretending to be good. You heal by becoming whole. The signs. Your shadow is acting out. You judge others harshly for what you secretly crave. You overcompensate with perfection to hide your shame. You attract partners who mirror the qualities you reject in yourself. You explode over small things because the shadow never learned to whisper. Every time you say, I'm not like that. I would never. How could they? Pause. Because your shadow might be speaking. And if you don't listen, it will scream. Facing the shadow isn't about shame. It's about truth. You are not your shadow, but you are not separate from it either. Your anger, it shows where you need boundaries. Your envy, it points to desires you've denied. Your fear, it reveals where you haven't felt safe. Your shame, it tells you where love was once withheld. The shadow isn't the enemy, it's the doorway. Integration, the alchemy of wholeness. In alchemy, there is a process called nigredo, the blackening. It represents the necessary darkness before transformation, the death before rebirth, the falling apart before coming home. Psychological integration is the same. You must dissolve the illusion of perfection. Only then can something new emerge. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To integrate the shadow is not to fix yourself. It is to see yourself clearly and love what you see anyway. That is true power. Freedom is not the absence of struggle. It's the presence of consciousness. Most people think freedom is a life without pain, but real psychological freedom is feeling pain without becoming it, feeling anger without unleashing it, feeling fear without obeying it, feeling desire without being consumed by it. You're still human, but you're no longer enslaved. You no longer live reactively, trying to avoid triggers, manage appearances, or suppress your truth. You live responsively, grounded, clear, and awake. The final illusion, identity. After you've faced the shadow, the pain, and the child, one question remains. Who are you without your story? If you're not the wound, If you're not the shame, if you're not the role, the label, the survival mask, then who are you? Silence. This is the space between identities, where your old self has died and your true self hasn't yet emerged. It's disorienting, terrifying, liberating, because now you are free to choose, becoming the soul self beyond the ego, beyond the roles, beyond the shadow. There is something deeper, your soul self. This is not a performance, not a reaction, not a strategy. It's the part of you that has always been there. When you were a child and felt the beauty of sunlight, when you cried over a song and couldn't explain why, when you looked at the sky and felt both small and infinite. The soul self doesn't need approval. It knows. It knows your worth. It knows your path. It knows your power. You don't find it by thinking harder. You find it by letting go. The return, living from wholeness. Now the work begins again, but not from desperation, from integrity, from presence. You'll still have bad days, triggers, grief, confusion, but you'll walk through them differently. No longer chasing love, no longer running from fear, no longer outsourcing your worth, because you've seen what's inside you, and you are no longer afraid. The gift of the journey. You began this journey looking for answers. You thought healing would make you feel fixed. Instead, it made you real. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be enlightened. You don't need to be unbreakable. You just need to be honest with your pain, with your joy, with your story, and most of all, with yourself. The final truth. You are not broken. You never were. You were fragmented, and now you are whole. You were scared, and now you are awake. You were performing, and now you are living. You were looking for someone to rescue you, and now you realize it was always you. Epilogue. Becoming the one you were waiting for. There is no final destination. There is only deeper truth. Every time you meet a new layer of yourself, you shed another mask. You release another illusion. You reclaim another truth. Until one day, you look in the mirror, and you don't see the hurt child. You don't see the false self. You don't see the roles. You see someone you trust, and in that moment, you are finally home. Not because life is easy, not because the past is erased, but because you have returned to your body, to your truth, to your soul, and no one can take that from you again.